getting yourself accustomed to reading and learning as things happen, and not ignoring the rule changes, I think is very important. And if you're too busy for that, then making sure you're relying on professionals and experts to help you.
Welcome to Investment Grade Practices Podcast, where we believe private practice dentists deserve to get the lifestyle today while building an asset for tomorrow. Join your host, Victoria Peterson, to design the practice of your dreams and secure your financial independence. Let's get started.
I'm so happy to be here on this episode with my good friend, someone who has saved my bacon more than once when it comes to HR law, Ali Oromchian.
Yes, perfect. Thank you. Yeah, that's awesome. It's not the easiest last name.
Well, in this episode of Investment Grade Practice, I want to talk about the concept of investing in yourself and investing in legal education. When I had my group in Wisconsin, Neighborhood Smiles, we used your HR for Health system. I love that for electronic personnel folders. It kept me in the loop. And what I loved about it most was that where people clocked in and out was right next to where the email message button was. So I know that they couldn't say, I didn't know I got an email. It's that you didn't check because it was right there. So you're an innovator. You are a legal eagle. We've just come through COVID. There's so much to talk about. But if you could maybe, in this vein of legal education, think about what are some of the things that get doctors in trouble the most when it comes to employees and employee law, and what are some preventative things that if you just knew this ahead of time, you probably wouldn't have made that decision. Could you help our listeners with that?
Absolutely, Vicki. Absolutely. Yeah. And thank you again for inviting me. I think if I had to break it down, I would say it really falls into three categories, right? So the first category where a lot of people get themselves in trouble is really in the beginning stages of hiring, the foundational stuff, which is the new hire documents, the employment manual, making sure that they're using a time clock system to clock in and clock out. Those foundational pieces, Vicki, is what a lot of people, make mistakes on from day one, because the reality is that there's no one really except, me and you and some other, innovative folks trying to educate everyone on how to do it. But when you come out of school or you start practicing for someone else or eventually become a practice owner, no one's usually there holding your hand saying, hey, you need to get a new hire, you need to get 12 to 15 new hire documents. You need an updated employment manual and all those things. So I would say that that's the first part, is making sure your foundation is super strong with the hiring. Then it goes, the next group of potential lawsuits that we see is something called wage and hour. And so wage and hour is making sure people are taking their lunches, their breaks, they're being paid overtime if they go over those rules. They're being compensated fairly. All those little details that we sometimes take for granted when we're hiring our team members. And right now across the country, there are new sick leave laws that are being put in place. There are requirements for tracking employees because of all the COVID regulations. So we're seeing a lot of that not happening totally correctly. And to your point, HR for Health was, we were, it was created with compliance in mind, because there's so many of these little, details that we forget about. And so the software really kind of helps to make sure that doesn't happen. And then, I think the third, and probably the most common now, during COVID, and I can't say post-COVID yet because we're still in the middle of it, but during this time is retaliation, unlawful termination. Yeah. And Vicki, it's so funny when I give these seminars pre-COVID, I used to always say that the retaliation stuff, the unlawful termination wasn't as common in dentistry. But now, because of all the new COVID rules, what's happening is that people are calling out sick, or they're not being vaccinated, or all of these things, and the doctors feeling frustrated, rightfully so in many situations, are letting them go or terminating them, and then that's causing that's causing problems. And there's sort of the right way of doing it, and then there's sort of the knee-jerk reaction. And so we want to teach to avoid the knee-jerk reaction.
So what's the right way to do it?
So a lot of times, especially when it comes to COVID-related stuff, whether it's being out because they have COVID or a family member has COVID, or they may or may not be vaccinated and their beliefs around that. The other rules regarding time off and things. The right way is, first, we recommend to communicate with the employee in a way that is very honest and straightforward, not judgmental, but really just kind of understanding why they're making the decisions that they're making, right? And so in the past couple of weeks, because of all the vaccine stuff, we've had a lot of conversations with our doctors who wanted to, let's say, for example, terminate somebody who wasn't vaccinated, and we had to have that conversation of well, what's the mindset there, and let's talk to the employee about why they're not vaccinated, and should they be vaccinated? Can we put them in a position where they're safe, and they're safe, they're keeping the patient and the other employees safe as well, right? And what I try to do is to make sure that our doctors don't make a judgment on that topic, because it's a hot topic, right? And there's plenty of reasons why people choose to be vaccinated and why they don't, choose to be vaccinated. It's not always very straightforward, but they need to have that conversation. And then that conversation allows them to figure out, well, is it a medical accommodation that I have to make? Is it a religious accommodation that I have to make, or is it just a personal preference? And depending on what those are, then they can go down those avenues.
That's very, and you bring up so many great points. My mind is going, in quite a different places. But one of the things that we don't think of a lot in dentistry when it comes to employment law is protected classes. You're bringing up a couple, like there's medical considerations, there's religious considerations. Are there new things that doctors should be aware of with protected classes? And it's not a good old boys club anymore. The Me Too movement and Black Lives Matter and the LGBT community, these are very complex human rights issues, and common sense is not really common around all of this because it's very new. It's new in our language.
Oh my gosh, Vicki, you're exactly right. You're hitting it on the head. You've heard me speak. I always say there's 3 times in your career that you should never fire somebody, and that's when they're pregnant, when they're getting older, or when they're injured or have a disability. Well, those protected classes have they're still there, but to your point, now it's what is your sexual preference? What do you have medical condition? Do you have religious preferences? Those things have become important because of COVID, right? Because of COVID. And it was never, it's almost, I can't remember the last time I had a doctor want to terminate somebody because of a prejudicial reason, right? Which is a blessing, right? I think, we're an educated, field, and people are don't think those in that way. And so that has never been a problem. But now, with the complications regarding COVID, people are acting in a way that makes it seem like they're being prejudicial, when in fact they are not. What they're trying to do is protect their teams, right? And I had a doctor just last week, as California passed a bunch of vaccine rules, and then some cities like Los Angeles and San Francisco passed their own rules. And now, Denver and Washington, D.C. and some other cities are starting to do their own rules as well. Well, I had a doctor call me from Los Angeles, and just almost in tears, and he was like, look, my issue is I have 2 staff members that are unvaccinated. That's fine. That's their decision. I'm okay with that. But I have other employees who have children with medical conditions. They have parents with medical conditions that they live with. And so he was afraid of what that would mean for their families if those that were unvaccinated got COVID and passed it. And, we're hearing a lot more of breakthrough cases. So it's just managing those right now is what's complicated.
And are there any states that are putting pressure on employers for the safety And so like, if you said it's okay, vaccinate, don't vaccinate, come to work, and then the employees started a contagion and it got back to those family members, is the employer liable, or is that a,
That's
we don't know
potentially, potentially that's the issue that we're trying to see. It's too new for there to be law on it right now.
Right.
But well, what we know is that if the employee of the office gets sick, then workers' comp will take care of that, right? What happens if their family member who's not employed at the office gets sick? You know, I don't know. I mean, could there be liability for the employer? Potentially, yes. Now, if the states pass their own rules mandating vaccines for all employees, which some states are talking about right now that the vaccine is like been approved by Pfizer or by the FDA, I should say. If they do that and an employer doesn't adhere to that, then absolutely they'll have liability. But right now, no state has gone that far yet. And so, but we are expecting if these cases rise, that they will, you know. So
wow. I love this as a podcast. I love this from our listeners, because we're going to get pretty polarizing on this one, and we're going to get the law around HR gets a little explicit sometimes. So I want to turn the table. I want to get a little controversial here.
Sure.
How does the doctor protect themselves against some of their employees? I'm talking about, I've had clients and I'm like, you should keep your eye on this employee. In fact, I think we should probably start finding an exit strategy. And I'm like, why? And I'm like, because you're knee to knee with this dental assistant all day long. Yeah. And she feels to me like she's got some predatory traits. And I don't even know how to politically say this, but she's hitting on him. And he's blind. And I'm like, this is not going to go well. And sure enough, his marriage blows up. She gets, she really went after him. This was a long time ago. Gosh, this was maybe 20 years ago, but it was a young college student. And I said, she's got some predatory tendencies and she's coming after you. And he's like, oh no, she's just fun. And I said, you're going to lose your marriage. You're going to lose your practice. You're going to be, and he did. He didn't lose his practice, but he ended up paying her college tuition and gave her mother $20,000 worth of free dentistry and a makeover. Let's talk about the 1, 2, 3s. I used to be, if you're a man and you've got female employees, but now gender doesn't matter. No. How do you protect yourself? Like simple things like, let's not be behind closed doors one-on-one with employees. And it's not, so help doctors understand this, because they just very innocently get themselves in trouble sometimes.
They do. And you know, I see it in a couple of scenarios, Vicki. So when we see these issues come up through HR for Health or our law firm, it happens either in the office or happens outside of the office in either practice events or dental society type of things that they go to, right? And so let's talk about the in-office stuff. So the in-office stuff, you're absolutely right. I mean, you just have to be careful and smart. You know, if not letting people come too early in the morning. You know, I mean, we have some offices where the employees are coming an hour and a half, 2 hours early, and you're like, well, why are you coming so early? And you know, there's sometimes good reasons. You know, they want to avoid traffic, or they want to do this, or they want to do that. But then the doctor's there with them alone sometimes too, and it's like, look, you gotta be super careful about that. Either you don't let them clock in because they shouldn't be working that early, or you tell them to go, come later, or go to a Starbucks or something that you and them are not alone when it's dark and you're alone, and anything can happen, right? So I think that is kind of number one. And the same thing,
or the perception of something is happening.
That's right. Or the perception. That's right. Because the perception is really, a lot of these cases is about that, right? It's about that. And what ends up happening too, and you're right, we've had female to female interactions become an issue. We've had, female to male, male to female. I mean, it doesn't, the gender or the perceived gender doesn't matter at all anymore, right? It could be anything. So I think being smart about, who you're with in the office alone, definitely not being behind closed doors alone. but also protecting the employee by not putting the employee in a situation where they're alone with maybe a patient that has these tendencies that you're describing, right? Because that could also turn into something else. And so there's that, I think, in the office. Then outside the office, and this happens literally every year in one fashion or another. It's either too much alcohol at the holiday parties, right? Too much partying at the state or local dental conventions, and things happen, right? People get alcohol in them. They start saying and doing things that they don't mean, and then it just kind of goes from there. And it is sad. I mean, it's funny because you want to have that relationship with your team, but you also want it to be arm's length and professional. And so that's it is a hard balance sometimes for male, doctors, owners, or females. It doesn't really matter. You just have to figure out where that balance is and what you're comfortable with. We had one case last year, right before COVID. Actually, it was like February-ish. The doctor went to Vegas, and a female doctor went to Vegas for bachelorette party for one of her friends, and they did all this stuff and took all these pictures. Came back to the office, and she's showing these pictures to the team. And we had, they had one gal especially, and she kind of got another person riled into it, but basically was uncomfortable with seeing some of the pictures, and that turned into something. And I mean, we got her out, thankfully, and it was a little bit painful, but we got her out for much less than the employee wanted. But it's a headache, right? It's something you don't want to deal with.
Now, I know you're going to go in a lot more depth in the chapter that you're helping me write in the book, but let's touch on that a little bit. Harassment laws aren't just towards sexual orientation or things like that. It's whatever makes the employees uncomfortable, right? Mm-hmm. And so can you give me a few bullet points of what are things that are deemed harassing?
Yeah. Well, so harassment is sort of a touchy subject because it's not tangible, right? And for every person, it could be slightly different. Now, there's a lot being said about this generation and their lack of, fortitude and their sensitivities and all of this. But what we're seeing actually is that was really kind of wasn't real, right? It was just something that we think that the media kind of played up and whatnot. What we're actually seeing is that as they're growing up, right, as this generation is getting older and older and older, they're acting just like every other generation, which is that there are certain lines that they're okay with, but there are certain lines that are not okay crossing. And so what does harassment mean? Well, it is really intended to avoid continuous behavior that really reaches to the level where somebody feels uncomfortable or feels threatened. Okay, and so what does that mean? Well, it's a little bit amorphous, right? So if somebody makes a joke once, is that considered harassment? Well, for you and me, if we're sensitive, it might be, right? If it's something under the law, it says no. One time is not considered harassment. Now, could it be, if somebody made that same joke a few times? Absolutely, right? We had a case where the doctor, we had an employee who transitioned from female to male. And it was actually in a very conservative state, and it was very, very difficult for the owner and the other employees to kind of really, accept that, right? And they liked her, but as she transitioned, she was not, then accepted in that community. And so the doctor refused to refer her as he, or him in male pronouns. And so he kept saying she and she on purpose. And so, the education we had to go through was, look, that can be considered harassment because you're not doing what she, or he believes, her pronoun is. And Vicky, that is really tough. I mean, imagine being set in your ways for 50, 60 years and then going through that, change. And so, it's hard.
I think we have a lot of cultural complexity now, and even regardless of the legality of it, you've brought up some really great points. Particularly if you're a young doctor, a new doctor in the practice, or a new team member in the practice. And I coached one office, and these women could drink you under the table. And every associate doctor that would come in, I would take them aside and I go, all right, here's the deal. You just came out of college. I'm pretty sure you like to party. Do not party. You are not allowed to party with your team for the first 6 months that you're here. It's written into your contract. You can't go out after work. You can't go get a pizza. You can't go get a salad. If they say, hey, we're just going to go get an ice cream, don't believe it. I said, they're just trying to, I said, I know you want to connect, you want to, but you also want to establish your leadership.
That's right.
So even in a legal way, you want to protect and preserve and create that professional relationship first. Once that's there, the boundaries are established. You know, no one's going to take compromising pictures that they can then blackmail you or kid you about later, whether it turns legal or not. It's just this boundaries of leadership and respect. Once those are established, it's easy to go out and have dinner. It's easy to go and have the group because the rules are set. But if you get into it too early and too casually, then sometimes the rules go out the window. And
that's exactly right. Yeah.
You're just in trouble before you know it.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Gosh, Ali, we're going to pack so much more in the book for our listeners. So if you're listening to the podcast, go pick up the book. Thank you so much for being here today. Are there any parting kind of words of wisdom that you would offer our listeners on just being great leaders and upping your legal education a bit around these areas of employment law?
You know, I think getting yourself accustomed to reading and learning as things happen, and not ignoring the rule changes, I think is very important. And if you're too busy for that, then making sure you're relying on professionals and experts to help you. And I would encourage everyone to go and check out HR for Health, because if you are in that category where you're busy and you don't know these rules and you're confused by these rules, which a lot of us are, let that team help you kind of navigate through that. And it's just a peace of mind, Vicki, that comes with knowing, I've got my HR figured out, right? It's safe. I'm good. They're taking care of it. I'm just managing it. There's a peace that comes with that allows you to really grow in other ways.
We'll have you back for another episode on leadership, office managers, and HR.
Sounds great.
I think that's a topic all in itself. How do people get a hold of you, Ali?
So a couple ways. You can call my office at area code 925-999-8200, and my scheduling coordinator will find us some time to chat, of course. Or you can email me at my email is my initials, so AO@DM and then counsel, and that's spelled COUNSEL.com. So AO@DMcounsel.com.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Investment Grade Practices Podcast. If you find value in this episode, help us spread the word by passing it along to a dental friend, subscribe, and give us a like on iTunes or Spotify. Learn more about building your investment grade practice at productivedentist.com today.